Hey everybody, welcome to the Insight Cafe. My name's Nikon and I'm your host. And today I brought back a guest we previously had on, but I'm going to reintroduce him anyways because he's that cool. So today I have the great pleasure of introducing to you Wyn Morgan, a highly sought after coach and consultant who has worked with businesses and individuals across the globe. His work removes barriers to personal and professional brilliance. And through mentoring, he helps leaders and coaches bring out the best in others. And since discovering the three principles 12 years ago, Wyn's life and work have been transformed. He now says, I now feel lucky to have been born. And that wasn't always the case. Please welcome Wyn Morgan.
Hey, good to be here. I always kind of want to look over my shoulder when someone describes me as cool, but I've kind of learned to deal with it now that if other people think I'm cool, that's none of my business. They're very welcome to that opinion. So it's nice to be back here, Nico. Always a pleasure, sir.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. And I'll have you know, only cool people are allowed on this podcast.
Right, well, now I know I'm cool, but with that endorsement, it's absolutely out of my kind of jurisdiction now. It's objectively the truth, right? That I'm
Right.
cool given what you just said.
And before we go into the topic, I'd love to comment on what you just said. I really love that about how what people think about you really isn't our business. Even like most people say that in terms of like bad things, but I think of it also for good things too. And knowing that is really helpful for keeping an even head about things.
Yeah, I think it matters both ways.
Yeah.
I think it matters both ways because I bumped into a few people at a conference in London the last few days, and people were so complimentary. People had never met, and I didn't
Mm.
know they exist, but they'd known of me. They recognized my face and various things, and some people said some lovely things, and a few times I didn't know how to react. I didn't know what to say. And I said this to somebody, and then the third person with us said, "You could just say thank you." And I said, "Yeah, thank you." And I went, "It's cool. It's nice. And it's not about me."
Yes, absolutely. I love that. So I'm really happy we recorded it. And well, let me get to the point of why I invited you today. So you and I had a conversation with um, a few leaders a couple months ago, and the topic came up of having more mental horsepower. And I had never heard that term before, and it blipped on my radar because my immediate reaction to that was like, oh, that sounds like something I want more of. And and the second thing that came up was like, oh, I wonder what mental horsepower is like because my initial reaction, like, oh, it must help me like work harder, right? Like that's what I think of horsepower is. But intuitively, I know it's not that. So I'd love to get your take on it. Like, what is mental horsepower? How is it relevant? And why is it something that would be helpful to pay attention to?
Wow, where to start? Well, I mean, I didn't know about it until fairly recently in my life. So the second half of my career as a coach, I've been in the coaching and development world, delivering corporate training and coaching people one to one for 25 years now. 25 years this month. And for the first 12 and a half years of that, exactly 50% of those 25 years, I had no idea about. And then I started to learn a little bit about how the mind really works, the human mind really works, 12 and a half years ago. And now I don't see anything more relevant than that. Because it answers the question, why sometimes? Why on one day we're firing on all cylinders and why on another day we're not? So last week, right? My Monday and Wednesday last week, I was so off my game. Really not with it. Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, firing on all cylinders. Now, that happens to human beings. But the great thing is, even when it was me in it, I understood enough for me to not have to have that much concern over it for reasons that we'll talk about in a minute. But anyone who has a grasp of the fact that mental horsepower, another question that it answers is, How well do we deploy the skills and knowledge that we have? How well do we connect with other people, connect with the project, connect with the task, connect with a deadline, connect with our people outside of work, connect with everything, including ourselves? That's absolutely down to the mental horsepower. And I've heard it a lot of people talk about it like mental bandwidth recently over the last 10 years. People have talked about that. I don't quite have the bandwidth for this right now. And so it's become more, I guess, talked about, but still misunderstood, in my opinion.
What occurs to me is I'm imagining I'm imagining how how this idea of mental horsepower, or not even an idea, it sounds innate. That's what I'm getting from this, is that we all have mental bandwidth and we all have mental horsepower. And what occurs to me is how when we don't know what's in the way of that, maybe like the mental horsepower is getting taken up to use for maybe battling an idea we have about ourselves. It takes up mental bandwidth, but we don't know it's being taken up by that. And then we experience less mental horsepower. And it's like we're trying to rev the engine, but not all cylinders are firing because they're being used for something else. And we're like, oh, why isn't this working as well as I wanted to? I I wonder if you could speak to that.
Well, what you've said is really profound and true.
Yeah.
What takes it up? It looks like to us
Mm,
that it's external circumstances. It's the past, the future, or what I should be doing, or what I should be, or shouldn't be, or
yeah.
shouldn't be doing. All of that noise. It looks like that noise is telling us something about the world and our work,
Mm,
our colleagues, the list of things we have to get done, the stakes, how high the stakes are in winning a piece of work or achieving the promotion. It looks like the outside circumstances are the cause of bandwidth getting low and bandwidth getting high. So we get on a high after we get a business win, for example, or we get a piece of good news, we get a little bit of a high, and we think that's the bandwidth is caused by that external circumstance. But with a little bit of scrutiny, it's clear that it isn't. Totally independent, nothing to do with the outside.
absolutely. I I remember I remember having a conversation with somebody over lunch about this, and her thing was she was dealing with a lot of pressure because she was working in corporate for a number of years, and now she moved to freelance, and she said she puts an enormous amount of pressure on herself to achieve things and to grow and to be successful. And as she was speaking, I realized that, oh, what she's really up against is from the inside, is that she thinks she needs this pressure in order to perform and to do well. And I wrote it out. I mean, I laid it out for her. I was like, so let me get this straight. So in order for you to achieve things, you need to put all this pressure on yourself. Otherwise, you won't, it's not going to work. And when she heard it fresh, she went, yeah, that does sound a bit weird. And what occurs to me in this conversation is when someone does that and they don't know they're doing that, I can see how their mental bandwidth or horsepower is being taken up by dealing with self-imposed pressure. And then it's like no matter how hard you push this engine, it the road is not smooth because it's being taken up by different things like stress and pressure that are coming from ourselves. Yeah.
Well, that's another dimension I think that you really
Mm,
hit the nail on the head with is that we think we do better with a busy mind.
absolutely.
When the rev counter in our mind is
Yeah.
high, pressure, stress, whatever it is, that we think that's when we're really on focus, really, clued in. And it's just not true. It's just not true. The question I often ask people, and I'll share a story in a second, that the last time I had a really long conversation with someone about this was, in your opinion, I'll ask somebody, do you think you work better with a relaxed mind or with a stressed mind? I've yet to hear anyone say stressed, not once. But then, at the same time, I'd include me in this mix. Forget that. It's like, no, I need to be on. Come on, come on, come on. And it's just I'm laughing at myself even saying it now. But it's so easy to be hoodwinked by it. It's so easy to fall for that trick. So the story I was going to mention was on a train going back from Portland, Oregon, um, back to a small town halfway between Seattle and Vancouver in Washington. And I was there. I was visiting my mentors in Washington State, and I'd been to see a mentee of mine in Portland, Oregon. And I was going back by train, and the train was 6 hours. And it was crowded, the train, because it was Friday, a week after Thanksgiving. So this was, I think, December the 1st or something last year. And because it was busy, there were no free seats. So I had the window seat because I got there nice and early. And then the guy sat next to me had just retired, as the story goes, as he was telling me. He retired within the past year and he'd been working for, well, I can name them because I'm not going to name the person. He used to work for Boeing and they're based in that part of the world globally, right? And he was an engineer with them for 36 years. So, and he wanted to talk. I didn't particularly want to talk much, but on the journey, I just wanted to chill out and, let my mind completely relax. But he wanted to talk, so we talked. And in this conversation, he was asking me about what I did, and he really was keen in telling me what he did. And then he was talking to me about his son, and he said, "Well, what would you say to my son?" And I said, "About what?" "Well, I think he's working really hard, and I think he learned that from me." So what do you mean? So he told me about it. So I just said, okay, one question. Let's call him Tony because that wasn't his name. Tony, do you think the mind works better with a tight mind or a soft mind? And he went, oh, soft. So that's all you and him ever need to know. And he got really quiet and reflective. And he went, I wish I'd have known this 36 years ago. We might have done a lot better and I'd have been easier on things. But he also said something interesting that he knew. He said, it's funny, when my mind was more relaxed, why, and it was so obvious what the answer to your question was, it was a soft mind, not a tight mind, was that when I was enjoying my work and I was more easygoing with it, we'd go faster, we'd go further, we'd find creative solutions to the engineering problems far better than we would have done with a tight mind. So the reason I'm bringing that is that instinctively somewhere we all kind of know, but it gets muddied with lots of other thinking that we've got about how to best perform with high mental horsepower and how to do a great job without it, costing our lives.
Mm. I so resonate with that. As when I was a Taekwondo athlete competing all around the world, my best fights were when I didn't have anything on it. And I was just really relaxed in my mind and body. And like things worked really, really well for me when I was able to get that. And I didn't know what this was back then. So I would just touch it every now and then. But my hope and dream was to be able to spend more time in it. And I would like similar to Tony, our Tony in the story, I wish I knew I wish I knew then what I know now about mental horsepower. And I have a story that comes to mind. Is I just realized it. I was doing a 2-day offsite for a company, and we were talking about similar themes. And one gentleman got up and he was like head of sales, and he said, "Well, I do my best when I'm being motivated by pain and suffering." And the room went quiet, and like I'll never forget this guy because he said it with so much passion. And in that moment, I realized that, oh, that's how he relaxes in a weird kind of in his own way, that when there's a certain amount of pain and suffering like that, he's able to calm down for some reason. And I'm sharing the story because it's still the same thing of we do our best when we're in a calm mind, but how we get there is like are left to our own devices, we'll like we do different things to get there, right? And what occurs to me to share is when we really understand how mental horsepower works, when how mental bandwidth works, is we it's easier to see the easiest way to get there, which is to be to me, which is to be really, really present with what we're up to. I read a quote recently is that we're made to work with the present far more than anything else. Like we're not made to solve problems in imaginary futures or try and fix the past. Like we're made really well to handle right now. And that's the question I want to ask you is what does being present have to do with mental horsepower to you?
It's the answer to mental horsepower
Mm,
to me. Because the only thing that can take us out of being present is having more on our mind.
mm,
So, and often they are thoughts about the past, thoughts about the future,
mm,
thoughts that look like they are things we need to pay attention to and attend to mentally, which is straining what actually is going on in the present moment. Because being present is being present to what is in the world right now, what is in front of us, what's right now on our to-do list, right now on the Excel spreadsheet, or right now on the piece of coding, right now in this meeting with a supplier or a customer or the boss, or giving feedback to somebody right now. It's always right now. And any thinking that sticks in our minds that we attend to about anything that isn't happening right now takes us away from being present, and that lowers the bandwidth in the moment.
mm,
It really does. I was giving a talk at a company last week, and I think we had about 40, 42, 43 people there.
mhm.
We were 2 hours with the group. And it was an introduction to effectively what this conversation that you've asked me to join in on today is all about. And I started by asking them the question, who else will confess to being a chronic overthinker? And I put my hand up, and everyone's hand went up, right? Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'll raise my hand to
Everyone's
that.
hand.
Overthinker, over worrier, perfectionist, overachiever.
Yeah. Well, we can all relate to it. Now, the next question I asked, given the fact I only met, I think, three or four of them before, is who thinks it's a good idea to overthink? None of them put their hand up. And I said, I know, and we still do it. So I'd like us, and I think I shared something like this, I'd like us to see the innocence of when we do it. And as soon as we spot it, notice it within ourselves that we do it, what will take us out of it? Because I want to go back to something that you said about we'll find our way to whatever works for us. We will, but often we mistake the cause for symptoms. So we think I will need to do something, take medication. And I know that in certain parts of the world that's become a thing in the world of business these days, right? That people will microdose in order to have a clearer mind. People will do all other kind of things, and I'm not against any of these kind of experimentations per se. I'm not going to be that dogmatic about it. But the key thing is, if the cause is overthinking and attaching meaning to thought, not the outside, soon as we understand that, and we know that thinking can just come and go, we don't have to do anything because the human operating system, I don't know how to say it better than our psychological health and well-being, is built in. You used the word innate earlier on. It is innate. Every thought I've ever had has come and gone. And sometimes I'll hang on to those thoughts and I'll make more meaning out of them and I'll ruminate over them and I'll then catastrophize over them. All of those things will take up my mental bandwidth. And it will look like I will need to do something from the outside in order to fix that inside. Such, okay, I'll finish that proposal, get to do that thing. And I'm not saying don't do those things, but Bandwidth is a completely internal, psychologically and spiritual, I will use that word because of how well we're made. It clears itself because we are that well made. We imagine, and what we imagine looks real, even though it's not. And it's really helpful to do that. And at the same time, as soon as we see it for what it is, it'll disappear as it's an illusion. And it will move on, whether we believe it or not, 100% of the time, 100% of the people.
Brilliant. I love that. What occurs to me is you mentioned how well we're made. And I think of when we're tired or when we're overworked, intuitively, we know we need to rest. It doesn't occur to us like, oh, I'm tired, I need to work harder. That will make it better. Like we just know, like our whole body slows us down, or like for me, when I'm overworked or tired, I get cranky and I get short with people. And I'm like, oh, I need to take a break. Like I just know that. And to me, that's so brilliant that the system is working all the time, like that, how well we're made. And now I'm curious, what are the implications of understanding what we're talking about on things like burnout or decision making or empowering teams?
But I'll talk about, was it burnout you said first
Yeah,
of
it
all?
was it was burnout, burnout, decision making, and empowering teams. And
Yeah.
and we'll
Well,
and
I think
yeah.
each of those, sorry,
Mm.
go on.
No, go ahead.
I was going to take each of them differently because I see each of those three things as slightly different,
Absolutely.
although two and three seem similar. Burnout.
Yeah.
You hinted at something that I think was brilliant just now. We get a sense when we're physically tired to take a rest. We misinterpret the signals, the early signals of mental tiredness for something else. So I'll get cranky, and it looks like they are causing my crankiness. So last night, coming back from London, there was an issue with the trains, and there was an issue in the trains in the morning, and now I'm really tired. And it would have been very easy for me to blame the staff at the train station, the staff on the trains, and all that kind of stuff. I would have taken up my crankiness on them because it looks like they're the cause of it. They're not. But my crankiness, my lack of sense of humor, my tightness of mind are all signals of my mental tiredness, of low bandwidth, not that the outside is causing it. So to me, when anybody, me included, when we get a grasp of some of the early warning signs, when our minds are getting really busy and tired, and we all have early warning signs. I will tend to be quite sharp and very task focused with people. Um, I will huff and I'll puff. I'll get a sweat on. All signs of me overthinking and getting stuck in my mind. Now, to me, those early warning signs are fantastic because they're telling me, wait, take a breath. And I mean a mental breath. Oh, yeah, I see what's happening. I've got a lot on my mind right now that looks like I need to attend to it. Because if I attend to all of these things, I'll feel better. But that's not how emotions work. I can feel better right now when I'm not overthinking. Because it's the internal system within me as an example of a human being that's causing all of that, not the outside. And it will look like it, but it's still the inside. So to me, the reason that matters with burnout, everyone I've talked to has had burnout. And I had a breakdown in my 30s, which is not dissimilar to burnout. Everyone I've talked to has had early warning signs they either ignored or didn't know what they meant. Every single one. So the hope for me in the work that you and I do with companies is that, and with private individuals, is that we're all waking up to the early warning signs that mean we're so far ahead of the burnout potential, and we're far more relaxed of mind, and we do better with a relaxed mind. So, burnout, decision making, and empowerment. So, to me, I mean, decision making is far easier when we've got less on our mind. We kind of know what to do when we've got less on our mind. We don't even have to think about it much. It's just like, it's just obvious. I was asking somebody at lunch yesterday, a mentee at lunch yesterday, because he has what looks like, what he looked like a week ago, a big decision for him to buy or sell his business. This guy, well, his business is in Florida, so he's thinking either to look or buy or sell, and it looked like such a big deal to him. And even then, yesterday when we met up for lunch because he flew over, he said, "So so which appeals to you most?" He said, "Oh, buy it." And he was so certain. "Oh, did you know?" He said, "No, I didn't know until I said that because we were just, you know, we were just having lunch." Sort of a chicken Caesar salad. It became really clear to him what he wanted to do. So we chatted about that for a bit, and he was laughing, and I was laughing with him. So decision making is far easier when we're not overthinking it. And the last point that you said about empowering teams, well, I think everyone, a good leader would know that empowering people is a good idea. But when we're not in good mental horsepower, good ideas don't seem so obvious to us. So instead of empowerment, we bear down and we micromanage. Instead of trusting their abilities, because let's face it, we probably hired them or the business did. We hired them. We've hired them to do a job, not our job to do their job, because that will be, another shortcut to overwhelm, potentially then burnout. It's really easy to notice, of course, I want my people to be empowered because that's them, their best. Me at my best is me doing my job well and everyone doing their job well. That's my great leadership attribute coming to its fore. And when I remember that, and I remember the only thing that can get in the way of me having good mental horsepower and clarity, regardless of circumstances, because that's the other point I wanted to re-emphasize again, is that no, this is regardless of what anything is happening, regardless of what looks to be at stake. Because if it looks like it's life or death, it isn't. But the fact that it looks like it is the sign that we've got a lot on it on our minds as opposed to it has a lot on it. And then we get a far more sense of being able to play full out, us and them as a team member. We have an awful lot of enjoyment and we're, I guess, really involved in our work and playing full out with a free mind as opposed to trying hard because it would be horrible if it went wrong. Two different worlds.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I know so many individuals and leaders and just anybody who works for a living or dealing with those kinds of questions is how do I deal with burnout? How do I make better decisions? How do I empower my teams? And what something occurs to me is something Michael Neal said, our mutual friend and teacher mentor, is this is like showing people how the advanced features of life work, how the advanced features of the system work. Like we have all these um, it feels like dials, like oh, like you have a lot on your mind. It feels like this, but we no one's taught us to see or understand them. And and because we don't understand it, we react to it in different ways, in weird ways almost, to try and feel better. But when we know we can we know it's just simply telling us what's going on in our minds, and we can literally drop our thinking and take a step back and return to calm, ease, grace. And the other part of this puzzle that's becoming very clear to me is the more we come down, the more access to mental horsepower we have, which is what we actually need to do the thing we need to do, whether it be balance, work-life balance, leadership, decision making, team empowerment. It's all so, it becomes very, very obvious. And at the end, going back to my story about having lunch with this person, at the end of it, she said, or I asked her, what are you taking away from it? It's like, well, I'm going to work on being kinder to myself. And it sounded weird to me. I said, it's like, this sounds kind of weird to me. It's like, why does it sound weird? It's like, you're telling me you need to work at not being mean to yourself. Like, why would you be mean to yourself to start with? And because in her case, that was a thing that was taking up a lot of her mental horsepower, is dealing with herself being mean to her so that she could do better, right? And to me, this just looks more and more obvious. And I really, gosh, I can't help but imagine what this information would do for leaders who really, really get this, like what it would do to their business, their teams, themselves. How much easier would work be if they really, really saw this for themselves? Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point, you know. You know, the other way of saying it that popped into my head now as you finished what you said,
Hmm.
we all know we do better when our spirits are high
Absolutely.
as opposed to down in the dumps, right? So when our are high, we know we do better, but we think stuff in life needs to be the cause of me having my spirits high. You know, the job needs to be great. I need to be paid more. I need to have this incentive. And it's just not true. So the greatest part of this, in my opinion, is when anybody sees that having high spirits are a good idea. First of all, a good idea. Secondly, independent and the mind left to its own devices will rise in high spirits. Then the amount of work someone can do is higher because it doesn't take a toll. Someone said to me last week, "Oh, you mean like the Navy SEALs teach in the US?" And I mean, what do you mean? Because I don't know that. Oh, I read a book once and it said, go slow to go fast. That, it's amazing how true that is. But we think it needs to, we need to pay the price. You know, a really busy person is a productive person. Well, they can be busy doing stuff with a quiet mind and high spirits. Discouragement proof. Any bad news from yesterday, not a legacy. Any good news from yesterday, not going to get into their egos and forget being present and really get into their own heads about that. Will be humble, present, and of a free mind more and more of the time. And I think that's a great thing to be involved with in our lives.
Absolutely. There's a premise in there somewhere, is oftentimes when we talk about slowing down, it almost offends certain people in business, where they think like, no, that slowing down means not being productive. Slowing down means falling behind. Slowing down is a threat to success. And to that, I would say, if it does look like that to you, then you're missing out on a lot of horsepower that's readily available as a result of slowing down. And I was thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking about when I was a Taekwondo athlete training 3 hours a day. I was really, really active and really training. But when I was like peak training mode, my mind was incredibly quiet. And that's the reason why I did Taekwondo in the first place, because I just noticed my mind shut up. when I was kicking things and being like, I just love that feeling of having a quiet mind because nothing else mattered except being incredibly present. And that was the artistry of it, of being in combat, in training and competition, but having a really quiet, more settled mind. And come to think of it, if I were to give everybody listening here a gift, it would be to be able to approach work with a quiet, more settled mind, because I know you'll have way more access to mental horsepower. Yeah.
Well, the other word that crops up as well, which looks like it could be a contradiction, but it isn't, it's
Mm.
totally complementary in my mind. Quiet mind is fun. Everything's more fun with a quieter mind.
Yeah.
So we get more enjoyable and we can actually put more into it to that point, right? Which is why in my mind, athletes and sport was really good to catch on to this quite early,
Mm.
where they were able to see what does it take in order to for someone to be at their best and not injure themselves because of overdoing it. Was when they had a free mind and they were just focused on one thing, which is, one of my clients was a high jumper athlete. And one thing that really helped him always achieve his personal best was when he started up his run towards the high jump, he wasn't thinking about jumping, he was thinking about the first step.
Mm.
He was thinking about now. Always. Always now.
Right.
And then when that step happened, then it was this step, and then this step, and then this step, and then this
Mm.
step. And in that place, everything is so much more fun.
Mm. Mm. That's brilliant. That's a brilliant place to put a pin on it too. For me,
All
is
right.
is is knowing that, if you're listening to this and your work doesn't feel, it feels heavy, it feels like anxious and overwhelmed, my gift to you would simply be to know that it doesn't have to be that way. And you don't have to change anything about your circumstances to feel better. And all it would take is to see this, what we're talking about right here, a little bit more clearly for yourself. Like that's fucking brilliant.
Yeah. Can I leave the
Yeah.
person watching and listening with one of my
Yeah,
gifts?
go for it.
Anytime it looks tight, anytime there's a sense of overwhelm, is a really good sign. I've made something up
Mm,
in my head. I've made it up. And when I see I've made it up, because I made it up, I don't have to do anything about it. I've seen that it's made up, and then I'm back in the place that you just mentioned. You go,
brilliant. Well, this was a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Wyn, so much for your time, your energy, your your wonderful insights into what we're talking into mental horsepower. I know this will be so helpful to everybody who watches it.
thank you.
Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching. And if this was useful, please share it to somebody who you think this might be helpful for. And like, subscribe, you know what to do. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.